Hello, everyone. It is a gloomy Monday afternoon in November here in New York City. We are on the precipice of becoming the Communist Islamic People's Republic of New York when we usher in our new overlord, Zohran Mamdani, with any luck. I personally will be hitting the streets of Manhattan to canvass tomorrow to help shake the very last branches on Election Day, not only to encourage people to vote for Mr. Mamdani, but also to do so on the Working Families Party line, something I am personally very passionate about, as here in New York City, we actually have third parties that, in large part due to our ranked choice voting system, have a fighting chance, but also many people aren't aware that you can vote for even Democratic candidates along the Working Families Party line without sort of compromising that vote or potentially splitting the vote. This is something we especially have to remind people of in state and national elections. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. I will be on the streets of New York City talking to the voters tomorrow. So if you have any questions about voting for either Zohran Mamdani or voting on the Working Family Party line, I'm your girl. But I wanted to quickly make this video, not only feeling a little bit motivated because tomorrow is Election Day here in New York, and I do genuinely feel that us potentially electing a Democratic Socialist is just, I mean, not only hugely transformative for New York City, but also a powerful message to the rest of the world, because New York City is a global city, and what we do has an enormous impact on what is possible, both for other cities in our country and nationally. I think it will also be a very, very important message for the Democratic Party, who at this point, as far as I can tell, is still addicted to losing, very much cannot get enough of that losing. And so I'm hoping that this will at least tell them that even if they personally loathe further left politics, that they may eventually have to get on board for purely opportunistic reasons, because one way or another, we will be primarying Chuck Schumer. God willing. I also wanted to say this today to make this video and really put a line in the sand because although I've mentioned it in other videos, it's a recurring theme here on TFD, I think it really, really warrants its own video. And that is specifically talking about SNAP benefits, formerly known as food stamps, these government subsidies that go to millions and millions of families across the country to help them fill their pantries and eat on a regular basis. This has been kind of hanging in limbo ever since this interminable government shutdown. There has been a recent court ruling that this must be paid for through the Trump administration's own budget. It looks like part of it is being paid for. This is just a political football that is so in limbo that between the time I record this and a few hours later when it's posted, things may have changed. If I had to guess based on how Trump tends to navigate basically all of these things, I would assume we're going to wait until the absolute very last minute to do anything helpful, and then we're going to swoop in and pretend like we saved the day by preventing a catastrophe that we entirely created, we being the Trump administration and congressional Republicans more generally. So I would assume we'll have a swoop in and save the day type situation, allowing, again, him to look like a hero for a problem he's largely responsible for. But who knows? You never know. Really, anything goes at this point politically in the country. But, you know, anytime a government program like SNAP, this is similar with things like Medicaid, with, you know, free school lunches, basically any government subsidy that goes to help the poor instead of what the vast majority of them do, which is go to help corporations, the wealthy, and the military-industrial complex, and the personal enrichment of federal politicians. Anytime these conversations come up, we immediately begin sort of parsing out and drilling down on who is receiving these benefits, who deserves them, who doesn't, what they're doing with it, etc. You'll often hear things like, well, these are important programs because a huge number of people who benefit from them are children, as if only children are, you know, deserving of not going hungry in this country. And you will even hear what I think is a closer argument to the truth, but still to some extent misses the point, which is that, you know, 70+% of people who receive benefits like this are working jobs. Like these are people who work jobs, but just simply don't earn enough money to meet the cost of living. And they've done many studies now that show that in, I think, essentially no county in the country at this point can someone work a minimum wage job and rent a 2-bedroom apartment, or, you know, support a family of 4, or any of these things that used to be benchmarks for what a minimum wage was supposed to entail. It was supposed to be the minimum amount needed to support a family on the cost of living. We are so far removed from what the minimum wage actually is. You can go to inflation calendars and see what it was in, let's say, the 1970s versus what it is now. It's not even close to a livable wage. So essentially, more so even than the people who are receiving things like food stamps, SNAP benefits, more so even than them being subsidized, all we're doing is subsidizing the major corporations, the biggest culprit being Walmart, who are able to employ Americans at massive scale and benefit from not having to pay them a living wage. Essentially, these benefits, again, including things like Medicaid, free or reduced lunch programs for children, et cetera, all they do is allow the large companies who do not provide health insurance even to full-time workers, who do not provide a living wage, all it does is allow them to get away with that, basically. Allows them to have their employee costs massively subsidized. And this is not even to start with, the lack of things like pensions or, comprehensive paid leave, maternity leave, something that we've never had at the federal level. Like, this is essentially what we're doing. I think it's, to me, completely missing the point to even think about these programs in terms of subsidizing the people who receive them, because the greatest beneficiary, again, is the corporations who don't have to pay a living wage as a result. Even if the people living, at or near the poverty line or below the poverty line, even if they were really the primary beneficiaries, it's also worth noting that these programs represent a fraction of the subsidies that, again, we give to things like big agriculture, these massive multinational corporations, and of course the fact that they are often the first thing on the chopping block when you have things like the Big Beautiful Bill, which essentially just exists to slash taxes for the wealthy and for corporations without touching things like our defense budget or other budgets where I think the average American might say, I don't like where my money's going. I don't like that this is being paid for. I mean, I think even people who have, qualms with who might be illegitimately benefiting from something like a Medicaid or a Social Security or SNAP benefits, they would generally prefer that their money be going to that than rather, the most bloated defense budget in the world or more corporate subsidies that basically exist to destroy the competitive capacity of mom and pops and small businesses. So I think all of that is kind of a non-starter as a conversation. And I don't think, for the record, that people should be having to work full-time in order to benefit from these subsidies, even though, again, most of them do, because I believe that in the richest country in the world, there should be a basic level of care and quality of life that each citizen is entitled to simply because we can afford it easily, and societies generally are better when everyone is taken care of at a minimal level of dignity. When people have a roof over their heads, when people have a warm meal to eat, when people have access to medical care, when they are sick or injured. Part of the reason that our life expectancy is so low comparatively and why people tend to get so sick is because they can't afford preventative care. They're afraid to go to the doctor, not because it's going to be painful, but because they won't be able to pay the bill. Again, the leading cause, as we've said before, of bankruptcy in this country is medical debt. The fact that in the richest country in the world, someone can go from, paying their bills and putting a little into savings to going bankrupt because they happen to get sick or injured at the wrong time, to me is barbaric. We talk so much about what other countries do, especially countries that we might be on the precipice of involving ourselves in militarily, and talk about how backwards, how corrupt, how barbaric they are. To me, few things in this world are more barbaric than being in the richest country in the world that lets tens of millions of people fall into life-ruining amounts of debt because they got sick. That is barbarism to me, just a different kind. But even leaving aside the fact that most of these things benefit corporations, most of these things benefit, again, the companies who are no longer required to pay a living wage, even leaving aside the fact that most of the people benefiting from these programs do work, and again, a huge number of them are children, even leaving all of that aside, and the fact that no one should have to work to be entitled to, again, the very, very basics in the richest country in the world, I cannot stress this enough, and I want to say that this is what drives my politics and my political convictions more than anything else in the world in my life, is that I have been poor. I spent most of my childhood at just above, just below the poverty line. I have benefited from many government programs in my life, even though I only experienced it to a relatively young age and was privileged enough to ascend to a different social class by my mid-20s, and then now by my mid-30s be a solidly upper class person. That feeling of what it is like to be poor, to seem poor, to navigate the world and day-to-day decisions without money, will be with me forever. I will remember it viscerally forever, and it will continue to impact the way I navigate certain things, or even the way that I feel about myself and about my own life for probably the rest of my life. You know, in some ways I'm proud, for example, that I don't have a college degree and I just went to a community college and never finished, because I do feel like my professional success and financial success is in some ways kind of, you know, in spite of that or having overcome it, which I do feel proud of. But there's also part of me that feels very insecure. I'm the only person for the most part in my social group who doesn't have at least a 4-year degree, if not an advanced degree, and often from really prestigious institutions. And even though I rationally know that I am in the majority in America, once you earn a certain amount of money, you live in certain social circles in certain cities, like, that is no longer the norm, and I will always feel somewhat self-conscious of it. I will always feel somewhat self-conscious that my childhood looked very different from the childhood of most of my friends. And I will always probably feel the most strong, the most sort of comfortable connections with the people in my life who grew up in a similar way that I did, who have similar experiences, because I feel that I can relate to them on a level that, you know, I love all my friends who grew up with, you know, in a nice upper middle class neighborhood, who went to summer camp or maybe even went to private school, for whom college was a foregone conclusion, who traveled internationally, whose families took vacations every year, who always had, you know, over full pantries and, you know, all of those things at home. Like, I am so happy for them that they got to experience that. But there will always be that distance. There will always be that disconnect, just because we fundamentally see the world in a slightly different way. And I, especially in the past several years, feeling a true level of financial comfort, I cannot tell you how different every aspect of life feels. I often joke with my husband or with my friends that it feels like I've been playing The Sims for my whole life, and then I just entered the Rosebud cheat code, and now everything is insanely easy, and even the biggest problems are not really that big because there is always a way to solve them. Now, I want to be very clear that there are some things that money will not be able to solve, you know, death, some types of illness, you know, other kinds of unforeseen catastrophes. Like, there are some things, bad things can still happen to people with money, but not only are they generally speaking less bad, not only are they generally speaking easier to navigate, there are also so many day-to-day anxieties, fears, shames, etc., that just go away. You no longer have to worry about them. And even the ones that are left, you know, I was speaking recently with a woman I know whose husband passed away. And she talked about the fact that because she had set herself up so well financially, that she had the privilege of only focusing on grieving in the several months after he passed away, that she was able to travel to a faraway location and just grieve. And she recognized that is, you know, even in one of the most unimaginable tragedies, my personal greatest fear, losing my husband, that even in such extreme tragedy, there is an enormous amount of privilege that money brings. And again, on a day-to-day basis, it's a small thing, but travel used to be the most stressful thing I did, because if anything went wrong, I couldn't afford to fix it. I couldn't buy a new ticket. I've slept in train stations because I missed the last train home and couldn't afford a taxi, or couldn't get on a different one, and couldn't afford a hotel for the night. You know, I've had to cancel plans because I missed my flight and couldn't buy a new one. Every aspect of that used to be incredibly fraught. And now I never ever worry about travel, because if anything happens, I can fix it. I can, and if there's something that happened that is truly beyond the ability of money to fix, like let's say all planes are grounded for some reason, I know that is quote unquote not my fault enough that I won't be punished for it, even if let's say it's a work obligation or something like that. When you don't have money for day-to-day things and it prevents you from, let's say, getting to work on time, or, being able to do something you said you were going to do, or whatever the case, you are often so ashamed of the fact that it is because of money that you couldn't do it, that you will often lie, or it's not considered a good enough reason. And so these problems tend to snowball and compound. I don't drive anymore, but when I did, I lived every single day like on the edge of my seat if something was going to happen to my car, because if it did, I knew that would be, a snowball effect of then, potentially losing my job, losing the little bit of money I might have had at that point. That is why I ended up getting arrested, because I couldn't afford to pay the tickets I had. And then my license got suspended and my tags got suspended. And, then the arrest ended up costing me money and I had to hire a lawyer and all of these things. And I say that as someone who is still enormously privileged, even in that context. But it is worth noting that just the day-to-day experience of going through life with and without a financial cushion, especially a substantial financial cushion, every aspect of my life is easier. And I am more sort of able to navigate it. Nothing has done as much for my anxiety as having money. Nothing has done as much for my mental health, my physical health, my relationship health. Everything has been improved by having money. Again, this is not to say that I don't still have problems, but even when I think about the most stressful things that I have experienced in the past few years, my business, especially coming out of COVID, really struggled. I was one of the small businesses that actually used the PPP loans to pay people. We got the employee retention credit for keeping our employees. I had to, put several $100,000s of my and my husband's money into the company to keep payroll going. I thought I was going to have to shut the company down. These were incredibly stressful things. I lost sleep. I was, shaking all the time. I gained a ton of weight because I was binge eating to regulate my stress. It was bad. It was bad for me. And I do think that these are things that the average person would find incredibly stressful and incredibly hard to navigate. And I'm proud of myself that I was able to get through it. But I would be lying if I told you that wasn't a fraction of the stress and anxiety and scarcity that I experienced when I just didn't know if I could afford enough gas to get to the office. And oftentimes I think the grander scale of people who are job creators or people who are entrepreneurs or people who are business owners or titans of industry, executives, etc., because the scale of their problems is larger on paper, we allow ourselves to be lied to that they are more stressful, more difficult, more hard to navigate than someone who's just figuring out how to put enough groceries in their pantry for their family at the end of the week. And that is a lie. Even the most stressful situations I've experienced are a fraction of how stressful it was just to get by without money. And anyone who tells you differently is lying, and they would not trade places with you. A wealthy person who's going through a really stressful moment with work or, with something they're looking to purchase or whatever, who's experiencing things that are stressful, they would not switch places with a poor person. They wouldn't do it because they know that those problems are not as bad, even if the scale is much larger. This is, by the way, the same reason why I'm never impressed with rich people who brag about how much they give to charity, because it's usually, when you measure it against what they actually earn, an absolute fraction of their money. And most people who have much less to give, there's actually studies on this, proportionally, people with a lot less are more generous proportionally with what they have. And that doesn't surprise me because we allow ourselves to be blown away by the scale of things when people say, well, I gave 100,000, 200,000, a million, whatever. Especially when it comes to other business owners, I always want to look at them and say, oh, you gave 6 figures to charity, but what do you pay your employees? Do they all have maternity leave? Do they all have health insurance? Do they all have good PTO? Because I may not give quite as much to charity, but I'm like the 5th highest paid person in this company because I would rather that everyone who works for me, who helps enrich my life, who helps enrich my company, that they be well taken care of, rather than being a CEO who has most of their employees barely on livable wages without basics like maternity leave, and then brag about how much they give to their church or how much they give to a charity. You should have less of that money to begin with. That money should have never been yours to begin with. And we have a broken tax system that allows you as the rich person to decide what are the causes or who are the people that are worthy of giving that money to. Even in, making the decisions I make with how I run my business, I do think it is a step in the right direction, but I still think that our tax code is so broken that it is up to me, for example, to ensure that they all have health insurance, to ensure that they all have maternity leave. That shouldn't even be up to the individual business owner. You should not just have to cross your fingers and hope you get a business owner who gives a shit about those things. It should be, to take it back to my earlier point, a right for everyone. And even when it comes to working hard, is running a business difficult? Sure. Is, having multiple streams of income or whatever, the hustle shit that we all love to brag about on social media, can it be hard? Sure. Can it be time consuming? Sure. Is it harder than when I worked in fucking food service? No. Is it harder than when I was a full-time nanny? No. On every level, the jobs that are disproportionately being done by people who receive these benefits, the people working in as home health aides, who are working in Walmarts, who are stocking shelves, who are doing food service, they work harder. They don't get the luxury that I do of working from my pajamas if I don't feel good one day. They don't get the luxury of working anywhere in the world. They don't get the luxury of, paid time off, and I'm not going to take it, but I could if I wanted to, maternity leave. They don't get the luxury of being treated in many cases like a human being in the workplace. On every level, no matter how stressful my job has gotten at different times, I sit on my computer and type emails and make many times over what I ever made when I was working in the service industry, when I was really scraping by. And that is what always makes me feel so sad, so tragic, feel so tragic about the way that the poor and working class in this country and the world over are so effectively turned against the wrong enemies, told that it is the fault of, I guess right now it's a lot of trans people. We've got immigrants, which is a perennial favorite, and even if you did want to think it was the problem of immigrants, you're not even pointing your anger toward the corporations and toward the companies who are using illegal labor to not have to pay a living wage, who are, exploiting visa systems, to not pay, competitive American wages. And then at the same time, keep these people essentially locked in these jobs with these H-1B visas because their visa status and their ability to stay in the country is tied to their employment. So these companies get to exploit them and get them to do things that they would never be able to ask of an American citizen. My husband used to be one of those H-1B workers. Those are horrible jobs because they don't have to treat those employees fairly because they can't go anywhere. If they leave the job, they leave the country. So even if you were to get angry about the fact that there are quote unquote too many immigrants taking American jobs, you're not even angry at the right person. You're not even angry at the groups who are really benefiting from this while exploiting all parties in the process. And it's also part of the reason why I do feel hope in the long term that we will be able to get back a sense of class solidarity and a sense of righteous anger at the people who are so benefiting from the working and even middle classes staying so divided and pointing the fingers at each other instead of upwards. And I look at the fact that Mamdani was able to sweep in the primaries unexpectedly, in large part because he was able to flip back a lot of people who had turned to Trump in the 2024 election. I do not believe that almost anyone in this country, there are probably some, but not very many, who are lost causes. I don't believe that. I don't think we can afford to believe that. And I feel very, very strongly as someone who not only grew up poor, but who did get to experience a bit of adult life as a poor person, that on every level, every aspect of my life is easier and better and just happier than it ever was before, now that I don't have to worry about money. Does money buy happiness? No, but it creates the conditions that allows it to thrive. And nothing matters when you can't afford to pay your bills at the end of the month. Not only should we not be nickel and diming the people who are benefiting from, these government subsidies, who are, recipients of one of the few positive things that actually come from our tax dollars, in my opinion, because trust me that 90% of the other stuff my tax dollars go to, I'm way less in support of. Not only should we not be analyzing them, we should be hyper analyzing, among other things, the corporations who most benefit from these programs, because it means they don't have to pay their employees, our fellow citizens, a living wage. Do not let them gaslight you. Do not let them lie to you. Do not let them make you think that a richer person works harder. They don't. And I'm still probably one of the business owners who actually does clock in and work actual shifts. Half of these executives, they're barely doing anything. Their fucking secretaries are doing most of it. Half of them can barely open an email attachment, and they're collecting multi-million-dollar bonuses while their employees, have to use SNAP benefits to feed their kids at the end of the month. And then beyond that, you have the entire class of people who don't even have to work because they make more in a single day, with the interest on their investments in some brokerage account than you'll ever make in a year at your actual job. And you can never convince me that people who are just, watching their money grow passively are really doing anything for society, even though in many cases they're the most valorized because they're the most wealthy. By the way, not to plug, but that is the reason why we're always talking about, if you can afford it, invest your money, open up a low fee brokerage account, Get a budgeting app. See if you can work with a financial advisor, because the reality is, if you can invest your money, if you can let it grow, the real gag is that half of these rich people don't even have to work because they let their money work for them. And that is not fake. Not everyone can access it. I certainly couldn't for a very long time, but if you can access it, you should be. I talk to people even in my own life all the time who have tens of thousands of dollars just sitting in a savings account. And I'm like, no, put that in your 401k, put that in a brokerage, let that money grow. But even still, even if you are one of the people who maybe, let's say, doesn't have enough money that just the interest from your investments is able to shore you up financially, which I'm lucky enough now is in large part my case, and is certainly the case for the richest in this country. They're not making money from the labor they provide. They're making money from their money growing. So be very clear about that. But even if you are not someone who is in that position, even if you're just in a position of you can pay your bills at the end of the month, you put a little toward an emergency fund, you could take a vacation or two each year, like that is already such a blessing. Because to even be in that place, the difference between that and being on the hook every single month for whether or not you're even going to be able to stay in your home night and day. We are such a rich country. And for some reason, we are so addicted to worshiping at the feet of rich people and judging poor people relentlessly. But I promise you, having been in both positions, there is absolutely no planet on which I work harder, am more productive or less lazy or any of those things than I was when I didn't have a lot of money. I know that on every level, I do not work as hard as any, let's say, single mom on SNAP benefits. Not even close. Not even close. We're not even on the same planet. Because again, not only do I have the luxury to work in many, many ways that are not afforded to most American workers, but I'm also treated with dignity and respect and humanity in the process, which is a lot more than we can say for most poor people. Anyway, protect SNAP, universal health care. Let's get Mom Donnie in office tomorrow, and then let's reproduce this around the country. A true populist, left-leaning, working class, uprising, movement of solidarity and political wave. I believe it can be our future. We deserve it.